When K-9 handler Officer Gustavo suddenly halted, barking wildly into the breeze, his voice raw, urgent, almost otherworldly, Detective Michael Harris felt a chill run down his spine. Gustavo had never behaved like this, not once in all their years as partners. Yet here they were, in a sleepy suburb on the edge of Tacoma, Washington, a place where nothing ever seemed to happen, until a 13-year-old boy named Daniel Miller disappeared without a trace. And Gustavo wouldn't budge. He'd sensed something the rest of the team hadn't noticed yet. Detective Harris was not easily shaken. At 37, with flecks of gray in his cropped brown hair and a decade in major crimes, he'd witnessed more than his share of tragedy. But nothing unsettled him like a missing child. That's when the quiet became deafening. That's when Gustavo, his steadfast partner, always seemed to know what to do. Gustavo was more than a dog. He was a true partner. 5 years old, a German shepherd with an uncanny sense of smell. He was known across several counties for tracking down the lost, the hurt, the scared, and sometimes, heartbreakingly, the dead. It was a brisk morning when the call came in, April 30th. Daniel Miller was missing. His parents said he was supposed to meet them at a Safeway just a mile from his friend's house. The plan was to meet at 1 p.m. sharp, but Daniel never arrived. That alone wasn't unheard of. Kids get distracted, lose track of time, sneak off. But Daniel was different. His father, a former Air Force mechanic now working for the post office, described him as obsessively punctual, almost fixated on time. He'd get upset if dinner was late or if the school bus came early. Maybe a little quirky, but not the type to just wander off. Michael read the missing persons report in the squad car while Gustavo whined beside him, pawing at the floor as if he already sensed this case would be tough. Their first stop was the Wallace home, Daniel's friend Ethan's house, where Daniel had stayed the night before. Ethan's mother answered the door, hair damp, robe tied tight, looking surprised to see police. She seemed uneasy but explained that Daniel had left just before noon, suddenly jumping up from the kitchen table, pointing out the window and shouting, "That's my dad's car! I have to catch him!" He ran out, leaving his backpack behind. That detail nagged at Michael. Why would a boy so obsessed with being on time leave his bag? Michael circled the Wallace property while officers inside took statements. Gustavo followed, nose to the ground, sniffing the grass, the air, the sidewalk. Suddenly the dog froze by the side gate, growled, and began digging at the dirt. Michael knelt down. Half buried was a dirty grass-stained white sneaker. He turned it over, torn laces, worn sole, faint initials in marker, DM, Daniel Miller. Got something? Michael called out. The area was quickly taped off, though the Wallaces insisted they'd never seen the shoe before. Ethan's mom said Daniel had worn a different pair, but admitted she hadn't really noticed that morning. Michael didn't like it. None of it felt right. Back in the car, he reviewed Daniel's possible routes to Safeway. There were two: the direct way along Juniper Street, or a longer winding shortcut through Pinewood Creek Trail, a wooded path teens liked, but parents warned against. Too isolated, too many stories of older kids hanging out there. Most kids took the safe route, but as Michael drove past Pinewood Trail, Gustavo perked up, ears twitching, nose pressed to the window. When Michael slowed at the trailhead, Gustavo barked, sharp, insistent. He wanted out. Michael unclipped the harness and Gustavo shot into the brush. Michael followed, ducking branches, boots crunching leaves. The trail was narrow, lined with evergreens and mossy logs. The wind made it feel colder than it was. About 40 yards in, Gustavo stopped again, this time near a low shrub. He sniffed, barked, looked up at Michael, tail stiff. Michael parted the leaves. There, snagged on a branch, was a torn scrap of blue fabric, the same color Daniel's parents said he'd been wearing. They called in forensics, but it was clear this would take time. The trail was long and winding, and evidence could easily be missed. Still, Michael had a sinking feeling Daniel had come this way. Maybe to save time, or maybe someone had lured him. Back at the station that afternoon, Michael got an unexpected call from the school resource officer at Daniel's junior high. "The kids are talking," she said. "There's a rumor. Daniel's dead." Michael tensed. "They're saying he was hit in the head," she added. "That his body's in the woods." Michael's blood ran cold. "How would they know that?" he asked. "No one knows. The rumor just started this morning, but it's spreading fast." Michael stared at the evidence board in his office. No body, no blood, no proof of violence. Yet the kids already seemed to know or think they did. He didn't believe in coincidences. That night, he returned to Pinewood Trail with Gustavo. The forensics team had cleared out, but Michael wanted to see the place in silence. Gustavo sniffed every corner of the clearing, paused beside a log, whined softly, then lay down. Ears drooped, eyes fixed on the ground. It was his signal. Someone had died here. Michael didn't sleep that night. He pored over every detail, every statement, every timeline. Something was off. The Wallace family story had holes. The rumors at school were too specific. And Gustavo, his unflappable partner, had practically screamed that this wasn't just a missing child. It was something darker, and Michael Harris was determined to find out what. Detective Harris had seen plenty of missing kids. Most came home. Some ran away and returned after a few days. But this case, Daniel Miller, felt different from the start. It wasn't just Gustavo's behavior, though the K-9's anxiety was a warning sign. It wasn't even Daniel's reputation for punctuality, yet failing to show up at Safeway. It was the silence, the heavy, uneasy quiet that followed every question Michael asked around town. People didn't want to talk, and when they did, it was in whispers. By Monday, Daniel's disappearance was everywhere. His face was taped to utility poles, pinned to bulletin boards, shared in blurry social media posts. He wasn't just another kid, he was everyone's kid, the one who vanished on a sunny spring day in the middle of suburbia. Michael stepped out of his department SUV and adjusted his belt as he approached Riverbend Junior High. Gustavo trotted at his side, tail low, nose twitching. The principal, Mrs. Kinley, had called earlier, worried about a disturbing rumor spreading among students. "Detective Harris," she greeted him, her voice tight. "It's already out of control." She led him through the crowded hallway. Gustavo's paws clicked on the linoleum as students turned to look. Some recognized the uniform, others the dog. All knew why he was there. In the main office, a stack of sticky notes sat on the desk, each covered in shaky handwriting, messages from students too scared to speak aloud. Michael picked one up and read, "They say Danny was hit in the head, that he's dead. Someone dumped him in the woods." Another, "He's in Pine Ridge behind the Wallace house. That's what Jake said." "Ask him." Michael frowned. This wasn't just gossip. The kids were repeating something disturbingly specific. He spoke to a few students with the principal and parents present. Most denied knowing anything. Some cried. A few said they'd overheard older kids talking about a party in the woods the night Daniel vanished. One 8th grader, a quiet girl named Hannah, stood out. "I didn't see him," she whispered, eyes darting away. "But people said someone saw a body." Michael's stomach twisted. "Who?" She shook her head. "Maybe Tyler or Wayne, but nobody wants to say." Gustavo barked, sharp and focused, staring across the school's back fence toward the tree line. Michael followed his gaze. Beyond the chain-link fence, a narrow trail led into the woods, the same patch known as Pinewood Creek. Kids used it as a shortcut, a hideout, a party spot. He crouched beside Gustavo and rested a hand on his back. "You smell something, buddy?" Gustavo sniffed the wind and growled low. It was enough to act on. That afternoon, Michael returned with a small team and a drone. Gustavo led the way, body tense, tail stiff. The path wound deep into the forest. Beer cans, cigarette butts, and snack wrappers littered the ground. Spray-painted trees and fire pits told the story. Teenagers had been here recently. Gustavo stopped at a cluster of thorn bushes near a rotting log. He sniffed, pawed, and whined. Michael pulled the bushes aside and found a strip of blue fabric stuck to a branch, the same color as Daniel's shirt. He held it up. "Bag it," he said. But that wasn't all. A few feet ahead, Gustavo froze, then scratched at the dirt. Michael knelt and helped clear away leaves. Buried beneath the mulch was a small, gray AM/FM radio, scratched and half covered in mud. Michael turned it over. The battery panel was cracked, the antenna broken. But what chilled him was that Gustavo had found it, buried in the woods along the exact trail the kids had whispered about. A rookie officer asked, "Think it belonged to the Miller boy?" "I don't know," Michael replied, bagging the radio, "but we're not ignoring it." Later that evening, Michael sat in his office, the scent of pine still on his clothes. Gustavo lay curled at his feet, tail flicking at every sound. The report in front of him was thin. No surveillance, no witnesses. The Wallaces said Daniel left around 12:45. The Millers arrived at Safeway at 1:00. Daniel was never seen again. But the rumors were too precise. Blunt force trauma, the woods, the party. That night, Michael called Daniel's parents. They sounded hollow, exhausted. Daniel's mother, Sharon, broke down mid-sentence. "I don't care if he's gone," she sobbed. "I just need to know what happened." Michael promised he wouldn't stop until they had answers. The next morning, Gustavo waited by the door, vest on, eyes bright. He was ready. Michael drove to Cedar Lane, the quiet street where the Wallaces lived. Their two-story house looked like every other on the block. Trimmed lawn, white siding, an American flag on the porch. But something about it made Michael uneasy. He knocked. Ethan's mother answered, startled to see a detective. "Mrs. Wallace," he said politely, "I'd like to ask a few follow-up questions about the day Daniel left." She hesitated. "We already told the police everything." "I understand. This won't take long." Reluctantly, she let him in. The house was spotless with a faint chemical smell. Ethan sat on the couch, silent, eyes on the floor. Michael sat across from him, Gustavo at his side. "Ethan," he said gently, "are you sure Daniel left when you said?" Ethan swallowed. "Yeah, he thought he saw his dad's car. He ran out." Michael tilted his head. "You're sure it was his dad's car?" Ethan didn't answer. Gustavo stood and padded to the window, sniffed the frame, then moved to the side door near the garage. His body went rigid, nose down, sniffing hard. "Detective?" Mrs. Wallace's voice trembled. "Ma'am, has this area been cleaned recently?" She hesitated. I mopped near the door yesterday." "Why?" Gustavo pawed the baseboard. Michael knelt and spotted a tiny smear of something dark, almost mist beneath the trim. He scraped it into a vial. "Just being thorough," he said quietly. As they left, Ethan whispered something. Michael paused. "What was that?" Ethan looked up, eyes wide. "He was scared," he said. "Daniel. He didn't want to go outside." Michael's heart pounded. "Why?" Ethan stared at the floor. "Because he thought someone was watching him." Detective Harris parked his cruiser along the quiet cul-de-sac. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows over the lawns, masking the tension in his gut. Gustavo, alert in the back seat, ears perked, nose twitching. The Wallace house looked like any other, but it was the last place Daniel Miller had been seen alive. Michael stepped out and opened the door for Gustavo, who leapt down with practiced grace. They'd worked dozens of cases together, but this one felt different. Gustavo had been acting strange since day one, more focused, more driven, as if he sensed this wasn't just another missing persons case. The front door opened before Michael could knock. Rachel Wallace, pale and tight-lipped, greeted him. "Detective Harris?" she said. "Come in." Gustavo padded silently beside Michael as they entered. The smell of lemon cleaner hung in the air. The house was spotless, too spotless. Rachel led them to the kitchen, where her husband Mark sat, arms crossed. Ethan, Daniel's best friend, sat beside him, shoulders hunched. "We've already spoken to the other officer," Mark said, defensive. "I understand," Michael replied, "but I'd like to hear everything firsthand. Just walk me through that morning. When did Daniel leave?" Ethan hesitated. Rachel nudged him. "Tell the detective, honey." "It was around noon," Ethan said, barely audible. "We were at the kitchen table. Daniel looked out the window, said he saw his dad's car, jumped up and ran out." Michael exchanged a glance with Gustavo, who watched Ethan intently. "Are you sure it was his dad's car?" Michael asked. Ethan shrugged. "That's what he said." "And you didn't see the car yourself?" I wasn't paying attention." Michael turned to Rachel. "Ma'am, did you see the car?" She shook her head. "I was doing dishes. I heard the door slam. That's all." Michael jotted notes. "Which direction did he run?" "Down Cedar toward Brookside Avenue," Ethan said. "That's the way to Safeway." Gustavo gave a low growl. Michael glanced down. "What is it, boy?" The dog moved toward the side door, pawed once, then looked back at Michael. "Mind if we look outside?" "Of course," Rachel said, her voice tight. Michael followed Gustavo into the backyard. The grass gave way to a side path lined with stones. Gustavo moved with purpose, nose to the ground, leading them to the fence. He stopped at the far corner, nose pressed into the soil beneath a bush. Michael knelt. The dirt had been disturbed. He brushed away the top layer and found a small blue Nike sneaker, size 6. It matched Daniel's shoes. Michael held it up. "Was this Daniel's?" Rachel gasped. That wasn't there before."
"Are you sure?"
Michael pressed. Mark stepped forward. "He probably just lost it playing in the yard." "Doesn't mean anything." Michael didn't respond. He bagged the shoe, then turned to Gustavo, who had moved along the fence, nose pointed toward the alley. "Did Daniel have any reason to go through the alley?" Michael asked. "No," Ethan replied quickly. Rachel added, "We always tell the kids not to use the alley. Too much trash." Michael nodded, but something felt off. Too many quick answers, too little eye contact. He called Gustavo back and thanked the Wallaces, promising to follow up if anything new came up. As he and Gustavo returned to the cruiser, he glanced back at the house. Rachel had pulled Ethan close, whispering in his ear. Mark stood with arms crossed, watching them go. Back in the car, Michael spoke aloud, mostly to himself. "A kid like Daniel doesn't just leave his shoe behind and disappear." Gustavo let out a soft bark, agreeing. Later that evening, Michael reviewed the Wallace statement again. Something didn't add up. Daniel's father, according to traffic cameras, had taken a different route that morning, nowhere near Cedar Lane. Even if Daniel had mistaken another car for his dad's, the timing didn't make sense. If he left just before noon, he should have reached Safeway by 12:15. But he never showed, and no one else saw him on the route. Michael opened the evidence bag and looked at the shoe again. Scuffed toe, frayed laces, worn tread.
This wasn't a forgotten spare.
It was one of the shoes Daniel was wearing when he vanished. So why was it half buried behind his best friend's house? He called dispatch. "I need a full property search order for 218 Cedar Lane, and get the forensic team ready." The next morning, Michael returned to Cedar Lane with Gustavo and 2 techs. The Wallaces weren't home or weren't answering. With the warrant, they began the search. In the backyard, Gustavo picked up the trail again, leading them along the fence to a section of loose boards. Michael pried one open, revealing the alley. Gustavo pushed through, sniffing along the ground. A few yards down, Gustavo stopped and started digging. The dirt was soft, recently disturbed. A tech joined him, brushing away soil until he hit something hard. A walkie-talkie-style radio, the kind sold in multi-packs as novelty gifts. Michael stepped back. The rumors from Daniel's school had mentioned a radio. "Bag it," he told the tech. "Let's get it tested for prints." As they continued, Gustavo froze near a storm drain. He sniffed, then barked. Michael rushed over and looked down. Something glinted in the grate. He reached in with a glove and pulled out a small black wallet. The initials DM were etched into the leather. Daniel Miller. Michael stood still for a long moment. The pieces were starting to form a picture, but it wasn't clear yet. Someone had tried to cover their tracks, but Gustavo had found what they couldn't hide. He glanced down at his partner. "Good boy," he whispered. Gustavo wagged his tail, then turned his eyes back to the alley, as if he already knew where the next clue was waiting. The sun was just beginning to dip behind the trees when Michael pulled the cruiser to the side of the road. The air smelled of pine and damp leaves, and the only sound was Gustavo's quiet panting. The trailhead to Pinewood Creek was marked by nothing more than a faded post and an overgrown path. But for Michael, it felt like the forest itself was waiting. Gustavo's ears perked as soon as the car door opened. He leapt down, nose twitching, tail stiff. Whatever was in those woods, he already knew it mattered. Michael followed, boots crunching moss. The farther they went, the quieter it got. The canopy swallowed the light, and even the birds seemed to stop singing.
"This is the place, huh?"
Michael muttered. Gustavo lowered his head and moved faster. The rumor had come in anonymously. A teen who used to go to school with Daniel claimed there'd been a party in these woods the night he vanished. It wasn't the first time Michael had heard about parties off Cedar Lane, but this one felt different. What caught his attention wasn't the party. It was what they said afterward, that Daniel Miller had never left the forest, that someone at the party had seen a boy lying in a shallow creek bed, blood on his head. And the most chilling part, the rumor had spread before the body was ever found. They walked nearly a mile in. Gustavo sniffed through thick brush, over fallen logs, past beer cans and cigarette cartons, the debris of teenage rebellion. Michael paused to note empty cups and a crumpled snack bag, but Gustavo was focused. He veered off the main trail, ears high, and pushed through low branches. Michael ducked behind, heart pounding. They emerged into a small clearing, barely 10 feet across, where the ground dipped into a shallow trench. Gustavo stopped, stiffened, and barked once. Michael crouched, shining his flashlight. The ground looked disturbed. Fresh dirt, boot prints, a charred pile of garbage, a scorched bottle, a melted lighter. Then something else, a crude fire pit, and next to it, a flat stone slab stained dark brown. Michael's stomach twisted. He took photos and called for forensics. "I need a crime scene unit at Pinewood Creek West entrance. Possible blood? Recent activity." While waiting, Michael circled the area. Gustavo stayed near the pit, whining softly, nose to the earth. It was as if the dog could feel what had happened here. Not long after, the forensics team arrived. One of the techs, Amy, knelt near the stone and took a swab. "Looks like blood," she said, squinting at the stain. "Old but not ancient." Michael nodded grimly. "Maybe weeks. Maybe the night Daniel disappeared." Amy frowned. "You think this is where it happened?" "I think," Michael said, "this is where they took him." Back at the station, Michael reviewed the photos. He zoomed in on the prints, sneakers, nothing distinctive, then the stone with its brown residue, then tucked behind a branch in one photo, something small and square. A plastic wrapper dirty from a snack bar. He checked Daniel's favorite foods. The brand matched. Michael leaned back, rubbing his temple. Gustavo was curled up on the rug, ears twitching in his sleep. "This isn't just a rumor," Michael whispered. "It's a memory." The next day, Michael met with Principal Sanderson at Miller High. She was composed, but clearly on edge. "Detective, I've told you everything I know." "I'm not here to accuse," Michael said gently. "I need help identifying who started the rumors about Daniel's death. Someone had details that weren't public." Sanderson looked hesitant. "We heard things on May 2nd. Daniel had been hit in the head, was lying in water, his body near the woods. None of that was released." She nodded. "Who started it?" She sighed. "A student named Wayne Ellis. Quiet kid, senior, hung out with the fringe crowd. Dropped out 2 weeks after Daniel went missing." Michael wrote the name down. "Did Wayne know Daniel?" "I think so. Everyone knew everyone here." "Do you know where he is now?" She hesitated. "After he left school, he got into trouble. Drugs, DUIs. I think he's in assisted care now. He was in a bad accident, paralyzed." Michael clenched his jaw. Another door barely open, already closing. That afternoon, Michael drove to the care center in Redmond. The facility was quiet, the scent of antiseptic strong. A nurse led him to Wayne's room. Wayne was thin, pale, arms immobile, but his eyes were sharp. Michael pulled a chair close. "Wayne, I'm Detective Harris. I'm investigating Daniel Miller's death. I think you know something." For a long moment, Wayne said nothing. Then slowly, "I saw him," he whispered. "They didn't know I was up in the trees." Michael leaned forward. "You saw who?" "Jason, JT, and a few others. They brought him there. He was bleeding, crying, asking for his mom." Michael's throat tightened. "They hit him again, then left. I stayed in the tree all night. Why didn't you come forward?" Wayne's eyes glistened. "I was scared. They said they'd kill anyone who talked." Michael felt the air leave the room. All this time, the truth had been trapped inside a kid too afraid to speak. And now it might be too late for justice. But Gustavo had brought them here, and that meant something. Later that evening, Michael and Gustavo returned to Pinewood Creek. The forensics team had finished, but Michael needed to stand there again. The forest was still, the light low. Gustavo moved ahead, pausing by the stone slab. Michael sat on a log, watching his dog sniff the air. He thought about Wayne, about the kids who kept secrets, about a town that let rumors replace justice. And he thought about Daniel, a boy with his whole life ahead, taken in the dark. Gustavo let out a soft whine and lay beside Michael, head on his boots. "Good work, partner," Michael whispered. "We're not done yet." Detective Harris pulled the cruiser to a stop, gravel crunching beneath the tires as Gustavo shifted beside him, ears perked. They were outside a modest 2-story house on the east side of town, not far from where Daniel vanished. It belonged to the Thompsons, a family Michael hadn't thought much about until a detail from an old tip stuck in his mind. Chris Thompson. The name kept coming up. He was quiet, same age as Daniel, and people kept saying they looked alike. Same build, same haircut, same crooked smile in yearbook photos. It was easy to imagine one being mistaken for the other. Michael adjusted his badge and stepped out. Gustavo followed, leash in hand but barely needed. The sun was low, casting long shadows as a teenage boy answered the door. "Chris Thompson. Can I help you?" the boy asked, wary. Michael nodded. "Chris, I'm Detective Harris, Kirkland PD. I need to ask you a few questions about Daniel Miller." Chris's face tightened at the name. "He was a good kid. I didn't know him well, but it's awful what happened." Michael watched his body language, the way his fingers gripped the doorframe, the way his eyes darted toward the street as if expecting someone to be watching. Gustavo stayed still, but Michael sensed his partner's tension. "You ever have any problems with a guy named JT?" Michael asked, casual but direct. Chris flinched, barely, but it was there. I don't know what you mean." Michael took a slow breath. We've got information JT threatened someone shortly before Daniel went missing, that he might have been looking to send a message. Does that sound familiar? Chris shook his head, then nodded. He looked over his shoulder, as if checking for his parents. Can we not do this here? Michael nodded toward the car. Hop in. Just a quick ride, Chris unraveled. He came after me, he admitted, voice low. About a week before Daniel disappeared, I stopped him from selling pills to some middle schoolers outside Safeway. I took the bag and ran. I didn't think it would come back like this. Michael stayed silent, letting him talk. JT caught up to me later, said I was dead, that he'd make me pay for making him look weak. My mom called the cops when he showed up parked across the street with some guy. He even pulled a gun, but the police said they couldn't do anything without more evidence. Did you ever tell Daniel? Michael asked. No, Chris whispered. But people at school knew, and Daniel, we looked a lot alike. People said we were twins. Gustavo let out a low growl, as if he understood. Chris, I need you to be honest. Do you think JT could have gone after Daniel, thinking it was you? Chris's eyes watered. He shook his head, but his voice betrayed him. I don't know. Maybe. He's crazy, detective. He wanted respect. That's how it works in his world. You get challenged, you answer with fear. Michael sat back, eyes drifting out the window. The pieces were coming together, slowly, messily, but undeniably. Later that night, Michael drove to an old 7-Eleven on the edge of town. A tip had come in from a clerk months ago. A photo of a boy found on top of a gas pump. That detail had been buried, considered irrelevant. But Michael had to see it. He showed the clerk his badge. You still got that picture? The man nodded, gave it to the manager, locked it up. Weird thing? In the office, Michael held the photo. It wasn't Daniel. It was Chris, and it hadn't been a mistake. Someone had left it there on purpose. Gustavo sniffed at the corner of the picture, then moved toward the door, pawing at it. What do you smell, buddy? Michael asked. The canine circled once, then returned to the door. Let's go, Michael said. Gustavo led them behind the gas station into a patch of brush, separating the lot from the alley. Michael followed as his partner moved with intent, sniffing, stopping, sniffing again. He paused near a broken fence, nose low, tail stiff. Michael knelt. Buried in the dirt was a half-burnt cigarette with red lipstick on the filter and a crumpled gum wrapper, the same brand Daniel used. According to his parents, it was subtle, almost nothing. But Gustavo had found it. Michael took a photo, bagged the items, and stared into the darkness. The killer had been here. Someone had been tracking someone, or trying to cover their tracks. By morning, Michael was back at the department. He laid out everything on the board. Photos of Daniel, Chris, JT, the radio found near Daniel's body. Strings connected timelines, locations, witness tips. But there was one more thread Gustavo hadn't let go of. The campground tip. An anonymous caller had once told Daniel's parents he'd been seen in a wooded camp used by squatters. Most dismissed it, but Gustavo had reacted the first time they passed that area. This time, Michael followed his partner into the brush with purpose. The ground was damp, littered with cans, broken glass, tarps. Gustavo paused near an overturned cooler, barking. Michael lifted the lid, nothing. But beside it, partially buried, was a tattered baseball cap, blue and white, with Daniel embroidered inside. Michael's heart stopped. Gustavo sat beside it, tail flicking. It wasn't proof, but it was something others missed. And it meant JT, or whoever had been chasing ghosts that night, had been here. Back at the precinct, Michael typed up his report, hands tense. He stared at the board where Chris's photo now sat next to Daniel's. Below it, he added a sticky note. Wrong target. The thought burned in his mind. And if that were true, who else knew? Because someone, maybe more than one, had started the rumors about Daniel's death before anyone found the body, which meant someone had seen him die, or worse, someone had shown others. But who? Michael looked down at Gustavo, who sat patiently beside his desk. We're getting closer, buddy. Gustavo gave a quiet bark. As Michael turned off the lamp, one thought echoed in the silence. They killed the wrong boy, and they'd almost gotten away with it. The sun filtered through the dense canopy, casting long, broken shadows across the forest floor. Detective Harris moved carefully along the narrow path through Pinewood Creek, boots crunching over twigs and leaves. Just ahead, Gustavo weaved through the underbrush, nose low, tail stiff. The dog had been agitated since morning, more alert, more driven. Michael didn't need words to know Gustavo had picked up something new. It had been over 3 weeks since Daniel's body was found, and still the questions outnumbered the answers. Michael couldn't shake the feeling that the whole town knew more than they let on. People flinched at Daniel's name. Doors that once opened now stayed closed. Something ugly lay buried beneath Pinewood Creek, literally and figuratively. Today, Gustavo led them farther into the woods than ever before. Michael followed him off the main trail into a patch thick with ivy and brush. The K9 stopped near a fallen log, sniffed, then began digging. Michael stepped forward. "What is it, boy?" Gustavo barked, sharp and urgent, then backed away. Michael crouched, brushing dirt aside. Something gray and boxy stuck out of the ground. A small portable radio, dusty, weathered but intact. Michael turned it over. The make was a General Electric FM/AM radio, the kind you'd buy in a multi-pack in the early 80s. He ran his fingers over the serial number. Something about it didn't sit right. He called it in. 20 minutes later, forensics arrived and cordoned off the area. Gustavo sat by the log, eyes still on the spot where the radio had been. He wasn't done. Michael scanned the area. The brush had been disturbed, like someone tried to bury something in a hurry. A few feet away, Gustavo pawed at another spot. Michael dug there and found it. Black leather, partially decayed, unmistakably a boy's wallet. He flipped it open. A faded school ID slid out. Daniel Miller. The pit in Michael's stomach deepened. They'd found the scene. The real scene. Not just where the body ended up, but where someone tried to erase Daniel from the map. The shallow water where Daniel's body was found weeks earlier had been a dump site. But here, this was the origin. As forensics cataloged evidence, Michael watched Gustavo sniff the perimeter. The dog circled a tree, then froze, head cocked. He barked again, a signal. Michael jogged over. At the tree's base was a rusted metal rod, bent like a cane. When they pulled it up, it was obvious. A golf club. The 9-iron head was stained. Not with blood, at least not visibly. But Michael knew. He just knew. This part of the forest was remote, but not unreachable. From here, you could see a faint trail leading back toward Cedar Lane, toward the Wallace home, toward where the party had been. And just beyond the next ridge, the same ridge Gustavo had stared at all morning, was where Daniel's body had been dumped. The pieces were snapping into place. Back at the precinct, the autopsy report waited on his desk. It confirmed what Michael suspected. Daniel Miller had died from blunt force trauma to the head. One decisive blow had fractured his skull. The wound had a shape. Long, flat, metallic like a golf club. No defensive wounds. No sign he saw it coming. How had so many kids known that detail? How had they whispered about Daniel being hit in the head and tossed into the woods before police even found the body? It wasn't a rumor. It was a witness account, passed through whispers instead of 911 calls. Someone had seen it. Maybe more than one. Maybe they'd even been there. And Gustavo had just led him to the proof. He thought again about the Wallaces, Ethan's stiff answers, parents who never called to check in, never came to the vigil, never attended Daniel's funeral. That wasn't just distance. That was fear. Or guilt. The radio found near Daniel's wallet. Michael ran the serial number. It was part of a 5-pack sold only through a now-defunct electronics store in the early 80s. The customer records were gone. But Michael found one lead. A family in the next town still had 2 of the same radios. Their son had received the set as a birthday gift 2 years ago. Michael made a note to follow up. Meanwhile, Gustavo sat quietly at his side, tail thumping once. "You did good, partner," Michael said, scratching behind the dog's ears. "Real good." But even with the evidence piling up, they were still stuck. People were scared to talk. Too many of the teens from that party had grown up, moved on, or built lives they didn't want to see ruined. And then there was JT, Jason Turner, the ex-military dropout turned local dealer, the one who'd threatened Chris Thompson just days before Daniel vanished. What if Daniel wasn't the target? Chris and Daniel looked alike, same hair, same build. Could JT have mistaken Daniel for Chris? There had been a photo, found by a gas station clerk weeks earlier, sitting on a gas pump outside a 7-Eleven. The man had called Daniel's father, thinking it was Daniel. It wasn't. It was Chris. The timeline fit. JT had motive. JT had a temper. JT had vanished. But with no one willing to name him, Michael was staring at a wall of silence. Still, he had Gustavo. And Gustavo didn't need anyone to talk. That night, Michael stood on his porch, Gustavo at his feet as a cool breeze rustled the trees. Somewhere out there, the truth still lingered, hanging on the edges of old memories and half-told lies. He looked down at his canine partner. "You think we'll get there?" Gustavo tilted his head. Michael smiled. "Yeah, me too. Because sometimes the best detectives don't need a badge. They just need a nose, and a reason not to quit." Detective Harris stood in the cold morning light, leaves crunching underfoot. Gustavo sat beside him, alert as always. They were back at Pinewood Creek, this time in the far southeast, where the brush was thick and tangled. This wasn't just another sweep. Gustavo had led them here, barking wildly the night before, refusing to leave until Michael marked the area. Today, with forensics combing the site, something felt different. "You think we'll find what we missed?" Officer Riley asked, stepping around a log, camera in hand. Michael didn't answer right away. "We didn't miss it," he said quietly. "We just weren't listening to the right one." He glanced at Gustavo and nodded. The dog surged forward, nose to the ground, tail rigid. A low growl rumbled as he stopped and pawed at a pile of leaves. Within minutes they unearthed a tattered sweatshirt, a rusted pocket knife, a scrap of black leather from Daniel's wallet, and then the object that made Michael's blood run cold, a small portable FM/AM radio with a worn General Electric logo. It had no reason to be there. Daniel's parents had already confirmed it wasn't his. "Same brand, same model," Riley muttered, snapping a photo, "like the one found near the body." Michael felt a chill. That radio, just like the first, was part of a bulk gift set from the early '80s. But who gave this one? Who brought it here? That night, Michael sat at his desk, thumbing through the evidence log. Gustavo lay curled at his feet, sighing. Michael stared at the radio's serial number, then flipped through old interviews and timelines. One statement jumped out. "I remember seeing Chase's picture on top of the gas pump at the 7-Eleven. But it wasn't Chase who went missing. It was Daniel, the kid who left that photo. Was he sending a message or hiding evidence?" Michael leaned back, rubbing his temples. So many people had known something. Rumors, whispers, sightings, yet none of it surfaced until now. The next morning, Michael met with Chase Thompson, now a 55-year-old mechanic living 2 towns over. It had taken weeks of calls and background checks before Chase agreed to talk. "I haven't thought about Daniel in years," Chase said, eyes avoiding Michael's. Gustavo sat by the door watching. "You and Daniel were close," Michael said. Chase nodded. "He was like a brother. We fooled everyone. People thought we were twins." "Close enough that someone could have mistaken him for you?" At that, Chase froze. Michael didn't press. The silence said enough. "I never wanted anyone to get hurt," Chase said, voice cracking. "It wasn't supposed to be him." Michael stayed quiet. "There was a guy, JT. He hung around the high school after dropping out. Sold stuff behind Safeway. I told him off once, took a bag and ran. Thought I was being brave, but then he started following me, stalking my house." Michael leaned forward. "You think he mistook Daniel for you?" Chase swallowed. "He said he'd get me when I least expected it. But Daniel, he wasn't even supposed to be outside that day." Gustavo whined, sensing the tension. "Do you remember anything else about JT? Last name? Car?" Chase shook his head. "He called himself Skinhead. Said he'd been in the Navy, always wore combat boots, drove a beat-up Camaro, red with black stripes." Michael's heart thudded. That matched a description from decades ago, buried in early reports. They had a name, a car, a motive, and possibly a mistaken identity. Now they needed proof. Back at the station, Michael entered the case room with Gustavo. He laid out every piece of the puzzle. Daniel was seen running after a car he thought was his dad's. That car never matched. The Wallaces went silent after Daniel vanished. Rumors of Daniel's death started before police even began looking. Chase, the look-alike, had been threatened days earlier. JT, possibly Skinhead, was seen around the woods the week Daniel disappeared. And now Gustavo had led them to a second radio. Identical, forgotten, left behind by someone who thought no one would ever look again. Michael circled a name on the board. JT Skinhead, last seen 1984. Then another, Wayne Thompson. The first witness, never interviewed. Wayne's name had resurfaced thanks to a tip from Chase, the boy who once partied near the woods, who spiraled into drug abuse after the incident, now living in assisted care, paralyzed from a car accident. Michael visited Wayne the next day. Wayne sat in a wheelchair near a window, hands curled into fists he could no longer control. A nurse adjusted his oxygen line and nodded for Michael to speak softly. Michael placed a photo of Daniel on Wayne's lap. "You remember this boy?" Wayne blinked. "I know you were in those woods," Michael said gently. "I think you saw something, maybe even before anyone else did." Wayne's lips moved slowly. "I saw the man with the boots." Michael leaned in. "He had a gym bag, dropped it next to the body, took something out, left the radio." Michael froze. "You saw him leave the radio?" Wayne nodded. Red car, black stripe, Camaro. It was enough. A week later, Michael stood with Gustavo in front of a property miles outside Spokane. A man named Jack Turner, JT, lived alone. The Camaro, rusted and half buried under junk, still sat in the yard. With a warrant and a forensic team, Michael gave the order. As officers dug through the property, Gustavo zeroed in on the garage, barking, clawing at the back wall. Behind the drywall, they found it, a box of old electronics, radios matching the model found in the woods. One still had a blood-stained corner. It was enough to reopen the case, enough to finally say justice might be possible. At the cemetery overlooking Lake Annette, Michael stood by Daniel's memorial. Gustavo sat beside him, quiet and still. "We did it, buddy," Michael whispered. "Took us 42 years, but we're finally getting answers." The sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows across the lake. To the camera, Michael turned and said, "Thank you for following this journey with us. Some stories fade with time, but others just need the right voice to be heard. What do you think kept the truth hidden for so long? Fear, guilt, or something else? Let us know in the comments below.